Good morning, folks. How y'all doing? It's Monday again, and I'm sitting out front in Fairfield here in front of my place, and just was giving some thoughts. And for some reason, two things came to my mind a lot recently, mainly because of that space IPO, SpaceX, and just it brought up some things, and the whole thing about Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire. I think it's funny. I try not to get into politics, so I'll relate this back actually to media blasters. Let me start with that. Is basically that one of the things that started media blasters was a person who, didn't really get much credit as much as he should. It was actually even before media. He was never he was through the whole process. His name was Sam Leibowitz. I think how I met Sam was I used to work at this place, IBI, and at IBI I knew this guy, William, and I was into I worked actually in this area of focus, this database and I did basically what they called IRNs, which was QA and just bugs and reporting that. And what happened was William, he belonged to this thing called the Space Frontier Society. So the Space Frontier Society was the promotion of going into space and forming a colony and all that. Back then I was really into Star Trek, still am. And what happened was I went to a few of the meetings. They were actually held on the USS Enterprise. It was held on the aircraft carrier, a small group. They let us have a room and got into it a bit. And that's where I met Sam. Sam was there. He also was in the whole thing of promoting, basically having a colony into space. And it's kind of ironic in that the way they thought it was going to happen was not through the government. It was always through private funds. And what the whole thing was to basically, commercialize space. And this was a long time ago. I mean, we're not talking a few days, a few years. We're talking this was before software sculptors, before all that stuff. And yes, I did meet Sam. We wound up where we hooked up, and he was always very entrepreneurial. He was always into his stuff. And what happened was I said, hey, I was doing computer consulting. He was doing some computer consulting on the side. And we kind of started to share resources, share contacts, and work together. And then eventually I did start Software Sculptors, and he wound up where I believe in the beginning he was on board, wasn't on board. He was doing part-time. So he had his own clients that he was supporting. I had mine. That's the way Software Sculptors was. There was also Henry involved, and everyone had their own thing. And we shared a space and shared, if we needed help, support, anything like that. So lo and behold was just that, as far as that goes, was that we were always, I was always into this idea of space, the commercialization of space. And with Sam, what happened was we wanted to do the software. I wanted to do it more than them in some ways, but we wound up making that software. And then Sam came with me to CP. I did sell Software Sculptors to CPM, and he came with me. And then once I left there, he also came with me to Media Blasters. And in the beginning it was okay. He had actually helped put some funding together. He did some things with me, but after time he really didn't feel like he wanted to keep doing the anime stuff. I was more on the anime, doing that track. He still was into, I want to do something with space and all that. So I gave him his funding and back and stuff like that, and he wound up where he did try to do that. He went to all the conventions. He started something, trying to do it. I know later on now I see him on YouTube and we haven't really been in touch anymore, but I think he does some kind of one of these kind of YouTube channels on self-help or something like that, or introspection. I don't know how to explain it, but why I bring this up was that, yes, seeing the SpaceX IPO kind of gave me a lot of thought, wow, going to space, the commercialization all that kind of stuff kind of made me think about the old days and what I was at and how much I loved it and how it turned into what Media Blasters and all that. And I was just kind of blown away of that people actually even take it serious now. People like Elon Musk, I'd probably Sam must have met him at conventions and stuff like that in the early days. I'm not really sure. But what got to me is the whole idea of just a trillionaire. I just really, to me, the concept of it is kind of really kind of crazy. I just think it's almost like the idea of money has become, it's almost worthless in a way. I just think once you start to reach those numbers of trillionaires and whatever, it's like, does money really have any value? The only people it has value for are the ones who need it to survive, and they're struggling and all that kind of stuff. That's why I see there's all this stuff on the web. I don't try to get into the middle of that, but just the idea of money and when we did this back then and I was into that whole Star Trek world, I was hoping by now we would be closer to what I call a Star Trek world. And I kind of looked at it as like, hey, why can't we figure out a way where your basic incomes, basic stuff is gets taken care of, like a UBI type thing. And then you can, pursue self-fulfillment. I always said that, pursue self-fulfillment, be it, in the mind, in the body, wherever it is. And there you can make more. But the idea of money and the idea of this kind of thing, to me, it's past its time. I think the original concept of money and what we used it for, and replacing, in a system where soldiers would go trading coins to get food, it's kind of gone by the wayside. And really, it's been manipulated to a point that, does it really have any value anymore? Does it really mean anything in what it was first intended? And what does it do? And I always wonder too, it's like, if you had $1 trillion or reach that much, when is enough? Like Elon Musk and these guys, obviously it can't be they're doing it for the money anymore, like Bezos and all that. Is there a time when you just say, you know what, let's slow down, let me enjoy the remaining years of my life, let me do all that kind of thing? So, and also AI, I think there's going to be a convergence eventually between the idea of money and AI, where maybe we will hit that Star Trek type of future where we will be able to do things. People on the web, especially, I kind of, not get into arguments, but I found the AI pretty amazing at the mundane tasks it can do, scanning a spreadsheet, doing this and that, and then you pretty much could be done for, what used to take hours. And people say, yeah, that's great, but then they're looking at the generative AI and how that's taking away jobs and whatever. My point is, like, why don't we think beyond that? Why don't we go beyond that and say, why do we need, to have the idea of a job that's pretty mundane, pretty, nothing really self-fulfilling about it. It's basically, I need this piece of paper to go somewhere and buy something to feed myself or for shelter. Is there any real, and people say, well, then people are going to be lazy, take advantage of systems. Some people do and some people don't. Sure, I do think there is possibilities of that and things like that. But is that really, how we think of the world and how we should think of people and how we can really make it where it's more? Yes, if you want to work on a farm, you want to work wherever, that's your choice and that's your thing. But why can't we make it where our whole survival depends on this piece of paper? Our whole being able to support our families, support our thing, depends on who has more paper. And then it becomes an issue of manipulating the system and manipulating it so I have more paper than you. and I can do things. And then the investment idea of wealth versus land, and why is this piece of dirt more important than that piece of dirt, and and I need to have more dirt than you to do things. It's just, to me, there's just this kind of thing where we do need a revolution. Not a revolution in terms of killing and having some kind of upheaval or whatever, but a revolution in terms of just the way we look at how we should live our lives and how we can live our lives. Just my thoughts for today. I know I got a little bit deep here, guys. Hopefully there's some words of wisdom in there, some stuff. And, you guys have a great start of your week. And there'll be more stuff, more Media Blaster related stuff. But yes, in a way, Media Blasters was started through the space frontier and trying to do things like that. All right, take care. Bye-bye.